Hello and welcome once again to Ourdadsstamps YouTube video. For today's video I'm going to talk about the stamps of Canada. To be honest, Canada's not a country I've really got into in the past, and before doing this video I really didn't know an awful lot about Canadian stamps. However, a couple of months ago I bought a fairly large collection of Canadian stamps, and once I got into it and discovered there's actually quite a lot of interesting things to look at. So let's get going and I'll share with you some of the things that I found out. Firstly, with the history of Canada, it's divided into 10 provinces and 3 territories. And initially 6 of those provinces produced stamps independently. They were British Columbia and Vancouver Island, which jointly produced stamps in 1860. These could be used in either province, but then in 1865 they each issued stamps separately. The province of Canada was another one that issued stamps. The province of Canada, as opposed to the Dominion of Canada, that is. The province of Canada issued stamps in 1851. New Brunswick also issued stamps in 1851, and Nova Scotia as well. Newfoundland was a little bit later in 1857. And Prince Edward Island is the other one which issued stamps in 1861. Interestingly, all these provinces first issued stamps in pence and shillings, but throughout the 1860s and 1870s they changed their currency to cents and dollars. Almost all the stamps issued by these provinces are quite valuable, particularly if you can find them mint. But equally, almost all of these stamps have been forged. Some of them quite realistically, so you have to be very careful when buying these stamps. And if you look at this example from New Brunswick, which I came across, this is actually quite a poor quality forgery, and close inspection shows it really looks nothing like the original. But of course the problem is you have to have the original, or you have to have a good image of the original. And you have to be aware to look for them as well. So if you're looking at buying stamps from any of these provinces, be careful and make sure you've got the genuine article, not a forgery. Another interesting thing with these provinces is that in 1867 the province of Canada, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick joined together to form the Dominion of Canada, and from then on the Dominion of Canada issued stamps that could be used in those 3 provinces, and the rest of the provinces followed suit, so that by the 1900s virtually all of the provinces were part of the Dominion of Canada and used the stamps from Dominion of Canada. The only exception to that is Newfoundland. Newfoundland continued to produce stamps of their own up until 1949. And there are quite a few people that will collect just Newfoundland stamps. And although I've mentioned them here, really I think that's the subject of a separate video, and maybe we'll look at those at a later date. The first stamps issued by the Dominion of Canada featured a profile of Queen Victoria and became known as the Large Queens. The reason for this was that within a couple of years they'd been replaced by what are known as the Small Queens. The difference between the two obviously being the size of the stamp. If you have one of each, they are obvious which is which. But if you haven't, I haven't been able to find any official measurements of each stamp. But just as a guide, I've measured a couple that I've got, and the Large Queen is 25mm by 20mm, and the Small Queen is 21mm by 17mm. And the smaller one is kind of like a standard stamp that we get in the rest of the British Commonwealth. So like the same sort of size as the Wilding stamps or the Machin stamps. So that will give you some idea. If the Queen's head you've got is bigger than that, then that will be one of the Large Queens, which tend to be more valuable. They were produced from a ½ cent up to 15 cent. And as I said, they can command, particularly mint, quite a lot of money. So they're worth looking out for. The smaller Queens present a bit of a problem for me, and I suspect for a lot of people, in that there were several different printings, and depending on the printing depends on the value of the stamp. And there were also several different paper types used. Now I've never been able to distinguish between different paper types, and Maybe it's because I haven't really studied this in detail, but it makes it difficult to accurately catalogue which ones you've got. And I guess the best way is to buy one that's already been catalogued for you. But the small queens are certainly readily available, and if you can work out the differences between the printings and between the paper types, then it certainly gives you something to hold your interest, and you can probably get hold of a large batch of the small queens and sort them out yourselves, making quite a good way to spend several hours, I should imagine. In 1897, the Dominion issued a set of stamps commemorating the 60th year of Queen Victoria and the 30th year of the Confederation. And this is quite an attractive set of stamps. The design features two different images of Queen Victoria side by side, and the complete set ran from a half-cent all the way up to $5, which seems a huge amount for a stamp in those days, and it was really issued with the collector in mind rather than the postal user. This set is quite valuable, particularly the higher values. When you get over $1, there was a $1, $2, $3, $4 and $5. Each of those mint is up into the thousands in terms of catalogue value, and well into the hundreds in terms of used value. So they are quite difficult to get the complete set, but the lower values can be got hold of fairly easily, and it is quite a nice looking set, so worth having a look out for. Following on from this set was a definitive issue of Queen Victoria stamps, and these came in two types. The first one is known as a maple leaf type, and it has a picture of Queen Victoria in the middle with 4 maple leaves, one in each corner. This set was only used for a year before they replaced it with one that had the stamp value in figures at the bottom instead of 2 maple leaves. Apparently this was because the French-speaking Canadians were having difficulty in translating the written value at the bottom. So when you get this set, they look identical, the only difference being in the bottom corners you either have numbers or you have maple leaves. Both these sets are readily available, particularly in used form, and can be quite interesting and a nice one to collect. There's just one more stamp of note during Victoria's era, which has been described by some as the very first Christmas stamp. Technically it's not a Christmas stamp. It was a stamp issued in 1898 to celebrate the Imperial Penny Post. And because it was issued at Christmas in December, it was inscribed with the words Christmas 1898. However, it's not regarded as being a Christmas stamp, despite the words. And it features a map of the world with the British Commonwealth shown in red on the different countries. Because of printing issues at the time, this red doesn't always come out in the right place. It's not always the same colour red, and there are numerous varieties of this particular stamp, none of which are particularly valuable. There were so many varieties that it doesn't make it worth any value, but it can be interesting to have one with several different colours on there. When Edward VII came to the throne, the Dominion produced a set of stamps depicting his image, and they used exactly the same design as the Queen Victoria one, with the values in figures in the bottom corner. And these go from 1 cent up to 50 cent in used format, easily to get hold of, apart from the 50-cent one. And again, quite a nice looking set, quite easy to get hold of, slightly more difficult in mint form, and can be if you can get the whole set in mint form. That's the catalogue value of over £1,000, so that may be more difficult, but certainly used format it's easy. Another interesting set in terms of design, I think, is the Quebec Tercentenary in 1908. This features 8 different stamps of different values. When George V came to the throne, Canada redesigned their stamps, and the one of George V shows a different background, although they've kept the square block in the bottom corner showing the value in figures. At this time they also experimented with coil stamps. So you can pick up the set of King George V stamps, which goes from 1 cent to 50 cent and isn't particularly expensive to buy. But there are also, as I said, coil stamps of the same image. The difference being that they are imperforated on one side. And you get two different types. One where the imperforation is along the top and the bottom, and it's perforated at the sides. The other one, the imperforation is along the two sides, and it's perforated at the top and bottom. This was only done with the low values, the 1 cent, 2 cent and 3 cent, but there's quite a few varieties here that you can look out for, and they are worth considerably more in some cases than the ordinary stamp. So if you come across some with imperforated sides, then it's something to look out for. You do have to be careful though, because for various odd reasons you do get some of these stamps with just one side that's imperforated, and these were from stamp booklets, I believe, where they only perforate in the middle bit. They don't tend to be worth as much, but certainly the coil stamps are worth looking out for and tend to be more valuable. Canada produced several commemorative issues around this time, and they can be quite valuable and quite interesting to collect. There's also, in 1928, they produced another set featuring King George V. But interestingly, in this set, the low values, the 1 cent to 8 cent, were a standard size stamp with King George V's image. But from above that, there's a 10 cent, 12 cent, 20 cent, 50 cent and $1. These were larger format stamps featuring different images pertinent to Canada. This set in mint format is a nice set to collect and reasonably valuable. You're looking mint at a catalogue value of around about £400, whereas used it's half that. And as you would expect, it's really the high values that take up the large bulk of that £400. So if you avoid the 50 cent and $1, then it's not too difficult to get hold of that set at all. And that actually was the case for some time afterwards. Canada produced a few more sets where the lower values were smaller stamps with the image of the king on them, and the larger values were a large format stamp with images pertinent to various things going on in Canada. And also, as you would expect, in each of these sets, it's the 50 cent and the dollar stamp that are the real value. The lower ones are quite easy to get hold of. And throughout this time, Canada was still using coil stamps. So for a lot of these sets, particularly where you've got the image of the king on a small format stamp, you can get the stamp with imperforations top and bottom or at either side. So it's definitely something to look out for. The 1935 Silver Jubilee set of Canada is totally different from all the others in the Omnibus edition. It's made up of 6 different stamps. The lower values, the 1 cent, 2 cent, 3 cent and 5 cent, show the royal family. And it includes Elizabeth when she was a princess, George VI when he was the Duke of York, Edward VIII when he was Prince of Wales, as well as George V and Queen Mary together on a stamp. And then you have 2 higher values, a 10 cent and 13 cent, which the 10 cent shows Windsor Castle and the 13 cent shows the Royal Yacht Britannia. So it's almost like a family album produced on a set of stamps, which is, as I said, totally different from all the other Silver Jubilee issues. It's not an expensive set to buy, and it's worth having just to show the variety. When George VI came to the throne, again Canada went a different way with the coronation issue and only issued 1 stamp, which is a 3 cent in a single colour in carmine. This was followed up with a definitive set, which again followed the format of the previous king in that the lower values from 1 to 8 cent are a small format stamp featuring an image of George VI, and the higher values are various odd images in and around Canada. Again, these go from 10 cent up to $1. When we get to 1942, Canada produced a set of stamps to raise money for the war effort. And this set of stamps really is the start of the reason why I've not been particularly interested in Canadian stamps. And my apologies to collectors of Canadian stamps and anybody who loves Canadian stamps. But this particular set, it goes from 1 cent up to $1. But to me, it doesn't seem to fit together. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 cent stamps featuring a picture of King George VI with a common design. But you also then have a 4 cent stamp, which is an image of grain elevator in Canada. You have an 8-cent stamp, which is a farm scene, both of these in small formats. Then in larger format, you have a 10-cent of the Parliament buildings. And none of those three have a common design at all, and they don't match the design of the King's stamps. Then from 13 cents up to $1, you have other images in and around Canada, and that does follow a common design, but it's not the same design as the King George VI lower value ones. So to me, the set just doesn't go together. It seems to be 2 sets and 3 odd stamps thrown together, and it just doesn't look right. And really from then on, Canada had a policy of producing lots and lots of commemorative stamps, but they were issued individually or maybe occasionally in pairs, but that was it. And there was no common design. So you look at a page of stamps from Canada in the 50s, and every single stamp is different, and it has got different designs, different sizes, and different features. And to me, it doesn't look like a collection. It just looks like a load of stamps been thrown together. And I think that's really why I never got interested in Canadian stamps, because by the time it got to Queen Elizabeth, there was a couple of sets when she first came to the throne that had a common design, but only for the first 4 or 5 stamps. And then the rest of the stamps are, quite frankly, all over the place. There's a few designs throughout the rest of Queen Elizabeth's reign that finally get it back together. In 1964, there's one of provincial emblems, which follows a common design. And to me, that's why I collect stamps. I like to have a page where there's a common design. You can see it's a complete set because there's no gaps in it. But also they look the same. They look neat and tidy with different images in them. But the overall look is of a set, not just a bunch of loose stamps. So my apologies, as I said before, to collectors of Canadian stamps, but I really don't get it. You know, it's just a load of stamps thrown out there. The last set I want to talk about was issued in 1967, and this does actually follow a common design, so I can wind back on everything I've just said and enjoy the look of these stamps. But the reason I particularly want to mention this set is that my father was in the Royal Navy, and when this set came out, he visited Canada as part of their Expo 67 exhibition. And whilst he was there, he bought this set of stamps for me, but he bought it in a special case. They produced it was almost like a box, and the box was for letter writing. There was spaces in the box to keep your stamps. There was spaces to keep plain pages and envelopes. And there was even a little wheel at the top that you could fill with water and use it to lick your stamps, if you like. And he brought that home for me, which was quite nice. And I did use it for years and years and years to keep my loose stamps in. But I never took the stamps out. And of course, over all that use and actually using the water base to lick the stamps with as well, I kind of ruined the stamps that were on the front, which wasn't a clever thing. And as you can see from the image, there's a stain in the corner that sort of messed it up. But it's a nice memento, and it does help me remember the fun Dad and I had collecting stamps together. Okay, so as I said, from then on, really, I'm not impressed by the stamps of Canada. There is no common theme. There seems no thought behind the designs, and I'm sure there is. Undoubtedly there is, but I would rather they produce lots of sets that go together. And people are going to come back at me and say, have you seen this set, have you seen that set? And yes, they do appear, but not with huge regularity. I'd like to see more. Having said that, some of the early stamps printed by Canada are quite magnificent, and it is often said that the 1928 50-cent Blue Nose stamp is one of the finest stamps ever printed. So there's definitely something to look at, and the amount of variety and differences in some of the early stamps make Canadian stamps very collectible, and one I should certainly be looking at in more detail. Well, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll look at another country in another couple of weeks' time, so I'll see you then. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. Don't forget you can visit my online stores at eBay and Delcamp under the name of Ourdadsstamps, where I have over 2,000 items for sale. Please join us again in 2 weeks' time for another edition of Ourdadsstamps podcast.